go.
Shh, be quiet.
Come on, Betsy, we haven't got all night.
It was Halloween night, somewhere around the year 1913. On the campus of the Central State Normal School in Edmond, now known as the University of Central Oklahoma, a few pranksters and a cow were climbing the winding staircase of Old North. One of the boys involved was a former student named Earl Rodkey. He had recently dropped out of the college with plans to go into business with his father. As the cow reluctantly climbed the staircase, Earl became worried about the prank and decided to leave before he was caught. Now, either the cow was mooing a lot, or the tremendous commotion caused the bell in Old North to ring. Perhaps it was both. 3 blocks away, police officers hurried to Old North to investigate. The students were caught while the cow was safely lowered down outside of the tower with ropes. Earl Rodkey had barely escaped in time. He would tell his children and grandchildren all about his many escapades and pranks, like the time he and his friends tipped over the outhouse of Mr. Aaron Fretz while the old Civil War veteran was still inside. That's the same Mr. Fretz that the Edmond Street is named after. Life was open record in a small town. Everybody knew everybody. The local newspapers, the Edmond Sun and the Edmond Enterprise, would eventually publish reports about the rambunctious lives of Earl and his younger brother Donald. When Earl was 9 and fell from a rock, breaking his arm, it made the paper. When Donald plummeted from a tree at age 12 and broke his leg, it made the paper too. The boy's passion for a good-hearted and unique approach to life would serve as a taste for how the Rodkey family provided inspiration for years to come. That very style of creative thinking from the Rodkey family would have a major influence on Edmond, especially when the city and the nation was experiencing some of its most difficult times. Before there was a cow in Old North, and before there were Henri Rodkey boys, there were his parents, Isaac and Catherine Rodkey. At a young age, Isaac Rodkey moved from Maryland to McPherson, Kansas to learn the milling business. There he met and married Catherine, and they had 3 children, Bess, Earl, and Donald. They moved to Oklahoma City in 1894 to oversee the construction of the Acme Mill. Once it was built, Isaac became the head miller. 3 years later, he and his business partner, George Farrar, purchased a small mill in Edmond and renamed it the Eagle Milling Company. Isaac then moved his family to Edmond. After a few years, he bought out his business partner's shares of the mill and eventually offered them to his sons, Earl and Donald. Isaac Rodkey's goal was to produce the highest quality flour and cereal products. Their flour had even won several national awards. Isaac's great-grandson Ken Reese still lives in Edmond today. He remembers visiting the mill as a child.
I would describe it as a triumph of 19th century engineering and technology. It was dusty and noisy, but an exciting place to visit. You know, it had its own power generation because when it was established, there was no electricity in Edmond. And I remember seeing that generator, which was sparking and noisy, and it was a pretty scary place. Then the mill itself, with belts running all over the place, and the man lift that would take people all the way to the 4th floor, and you had to jump off before you went over the top. It was a pretty spectacular thing for a child to see.
During the First World War and the Great Depression, when many Americans were struggling, the Rodkey Flour Mill had a lot of success. More families were baking their own bread at the time, and the demand for flour was high. Unemployment was high, but the busy mill remained the city's largest employer with around 30 workers on the payroll. The Rodkeys would also help local farmers by purchasing their grain crop each season. To further comfort families, the company would also create dual-purpose flour sacks printed with fashionable patterns. Housewives would use the colorful material to make clothing for the family. The Rodkey Company motto was, "Buy the flour, use the sack. If not satisfied, get your money back." Sacks would also be designed to make aprons, pillowcases, and even dolls for children.
I understand that it was my Uncle Don Rodkey who came up with the idea, perhaps heard of it somewhere, of printing doll patterns on the sacks. And then they could be cut out and stuffed and sewn into dolls for the children. And there were probably 8 or 10 versions of this doll, which it says on her back there, Rodkey's Rag Darling was her name. And apparently these are collector's items these days.
The Rodkey family was also very generous in giving back to the community. Isaac had helped to fund the construction of the First Methodist Church, where he was an active member. He even donated money to the construction of other churches in town. He served on the school board and was also on the city council, where the first streets in Edmond were paved. If that wasn't enough, he also served as a director of Home State Life Insurance Company and was on the board of the First National Bank of Edmond. His wife, Catherine, was also an active member of Edmond's social and cultural life. The parties she would host often made it in the local newspaper. She was also known for her fine needlework and for being an avid gardener. She was a founder of the City Federation of Women's Club, which raised funds to landscape Mitch Park, which was originally located in downtown Edmond, where the current post office now sits. Isaac and Catherine's home was across the street from Mitch Park on Campbell Street. The home was built in 1900 and remained in the family for 80 years. Their youngest son, Donald, bought the home from them in the late 20s and lived there until his death in 1980. After surviving several different owners, the Rodkey home was in danger of being torn down. In 2007, plans were in the works to build an office building at its location. In the interest of preserving its history, the home's owner gifted it to the city of Edmond. The city, the Edmond Historical Preservation Trust, and several generous donors invested in moving the home 6 blocks south to Stevenson Park, the oldest existing park in Edmond today. There are plans to renovate the house to be used for all types of functions that Catherine Rodkey would have welcomed in her home. For Catherine, home meant everything. Before her death in 1940, Catherine wrote about how valuable a home can truly be.
Home, what a hallowed name. How full of enchantment and how dear to the heart. A home is physically a place to live in, socially a place to have fun in, and intellectually and morally a place to improve in. Otherwise, it might as well move off the street. Home is the chief school of human virtue. Its responsibilities, joys, sorrows, smiles, tears, hopes, from the chief interest of human life. Home is a place of rest, refuge. Home is the spot where the child pours out all its complaints, and it is the grave of all its sorrows. Childhood has its sorrows and its grievances, but home is the place where these are soothed and banished by the sweet lullaby of a fond mother's voice. Make home happy to them when they are young. Send them out into the world in the full belief that there is no place like home, aye, be it ever so humble. And even if the old home should, in the course of time, be pulled down or be lost to your children, it will live in their memories. The kind looks and kind words and thoughtful love of those who once inhabited it will not pass away. Home, let thrones rot and empires wither. Home, let the world die in earthquake struggles and be buried amid procession of planets and dirge of spheres. Home, let everlasting ages roll in irresistible sweep. Home, no sorrow, no crying, no tears, no death, but home, sweet home, beautiful home, glorious home, everlasting home, home with each other, home with angels, Home with God. Home. Home.
Learn more about the Rodkey family and the history of other families who made this city what it is today by visiting the Edmond Historical Society and Museum.